Yes. All I see are robots. Yes. All I see are.
You are tuned in to All I See Are Robots, a retrospective look into the future for who amongst us can resist the machine. As always, I'm your humble host, the mad prophet of the airwaves, Adam Dutch Cole. And if you've come here in search of the highest production quality, I'm sorry, you've come to the wrong place, at least for now. But if you are a true, living, genuine human being in search of ways to navigate this ever-changing and complex reality that we find ourselves in, then I invite you in to explore along with me. The title of today's show is going to be 10 Signs That You May Be a Robot. It's a deep philosophical question that must be pondered as technology seems to play a more prominent role in who and what we are as a species. And so I want to explore these signs, and as you listen to them, I hope that you at least intellectually, honestly ask yourself, where do you fall on the scale as you hear me break down these 10 different signs? So with that in mind, let's go ahead and start out with which I think is a good place to start. We need to kind of get our definitions in order here. So according to Wikipedia, a robot is a machine, especially one programmable by a computer, capable of carrying out a complex series of actions automatically. A robot can be guided by an external control device, which I think you could probably replace that with the word culture or political system, whatever. Also, or the control may be embedded within. And that's also kind of a weird thing, thinking that the programming becomes self-replicating. Anyway, robots may be constructed to evoke human form, but most robots are task-performing machines designed with an emphasis on stark functionality rather than expressive aesthetics. So this brings to mind a long-standing philosophical debate, especially in the domain of human psychology. And that debate has been centered around the idea of nature versus nurture, right? It's like, who's in control? Are we more driven by genetics and biology and the genetic code found within each individual? Or are we more prone to be driven by outside external forces, the culture, whatever, right? And I would make the argument that given how we've advanced technologically, more than likely it seems that the latter is true. We are more nurtured by our environment. The problem with that is that who is at the other side of that nurturing? Collectivism is this idea where you give up your individuality in favor of a group dynamic. And so that lends itself to all kinds of questions that should be explored. But there are a lot of prominent thinkers, futurists, whatever you want to call them, that are having this conversation with regard to what that actually means. And so one person in particular that I wanted to highlight is a gentleman named Yuval Noah Harari. I think I got his name right. He's a futurist. He is a history professor. I believe he's of Israeli descent. He's an author. In fact, I think, yep. So if you haven't read *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*, I recommend that you do. It's an interesting perspective on the human race. And most notably, he is an advisor to the World Economic Forum, which some people view that organization as an unelected think tank who gets together on an annual basis in private and set the agenda for the globe. Now, that's a completely different video, but we'll get into that eventually. But I just wanted to kind of highlight what the conversation looks and sounds like. So I'm going to play this brief video so you can get a gist of what this gentleman seems to think, where we're headed.
The really big thing is hacking human beings. To hack human beings, you need a lot of biological knowledge, a lot of computing power, and especially a lot of data. If you have enough data about me, and enough computing power and biological knowledge, you can hack my body, my brain, my life. You can reach a point when you know me better than I know myself. And once you reach that point, and we are very close to that point, then democracy, the free market as we have, and actually all political systems, also authoritarian regimes, we have no idea what happens once you pass that point.
So, the hackability of human beings. Now, you could make the argument, or you could come from the perspective that he's warning against it, but I would say his affiliation with this organization, and if you look at the organization in its entire context, I would say more than a warning, it's really just kind of a prophecy in a sense of where we're going and how we engage and interact with technology. So the idea of us being hacked, maybe it's a legitimate hack as we integrate ourselves with technology, but I would also make the argument that we've already to an extent been hacked, because from the moment we're born and we enter into this world, whether it's the public school system or whether it's now because of our channels of information have become so consolidated, we're all getting a collective message. And so truly the idea of what it is to be a human being has certainly changed. And so with that in mind, let's get to the list. Number one, you get all of your information from mainstream corporate sources. Once upon a time, the media was actually your friend. It stood as a bulwark against the encroaching forces of tyranny. It provided you, the average citizen, the ability to pull from a diverse pool of information which would allow you to form your own independent worldview. But fast forward to today, and 6 corporations control everything that we watch, hear, and read. And so there is an inherent danger and conflict of interest when you allow a small and increasingly smaller group of entities to control the flow of information, right? I've got an article here from the Motley Fool, which is typically an investment publication, but it talks about the big 6 media companies right now, if you're interested, right? So you got Comcast, Walt Disney, AT&T, Paramount Global, Sony, Fox, yada, yada, yada. So again, the inherent danger is that you can form narratives that people adhere to, and that starts to form their worldviews. And so you no longer have a situation where it's genuine information being disseminated to the population. It's more akin to propaganda. And so what is propaganda, you ask? Well, I'm glad, and I'm here to define it for you. Propaganda, as outlined in the Encyclopedia Britannica, is dissemination of information, facts, arguments, rumors, half-truths, or lies to influence public opinion. So there's a gentleman that you should be familiar with, and that term propaganda is synonymous with him because he wrote a book titled the same thing, Propaganda. That was because the term propaganda was too, what would you say, politically charged. This guy in times of peace is this guy right here, a gentleman by the name of Edward Bernays. Now, you may or may not be familiar with Mr. Bernays, but here's a quick breakdown. So he is the nephew of Sigmund Freud, who was the father of psychoanalysis, right? And Edward Bernays has been deemed or called one of the most influential people of the 20th century. I mean, this guy is responsible for all kinds of ad slogans and jingles, and he's responsible for, I mean, he's the reason that we eat bacon and eggs in the morning, just to put it bluntly. So that's how influential this guy is. He wrote a book also titled Propaganda, right? And in that book, there's actually a quote that kind of encompasses what his whole view of the world was. And I'm going to read it to you here. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of the country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, and our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. It is they who pull the wires that control the public mind. So that sounds a bit sinister, doesn't it? But listen, the bottom line is that, again, the consolidation of media, it not only allows for corporate sponsored propaganda, but more nefariously, it's led to the outright censorship of those who would dare oppose their official narrative. And that we saw that, most notably during the pandemic. And the bottom line is, we're organic computers and we're susceptible to varying degrees of programming. And when the messaging is the same and it can be disseminated in mass simultaneously, and it has an agenda or a desired outcome associated with it, it's easy to make the robot correlation, right? There's a reason that they call it television programming. You're all familiar with it, you've seen it before, but it really illustrates and showcases that, there is a centralized message that's being disseminated to you, the average guy on the street. And so let me bring this up here real quick.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about trouble and irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. No. And so, again, this really just, it illustrates, it drives the point home. These people are not independent investigative journalists who are providing you sources so that you can form your own opinions. These people are obviously reading from a script. They're teleprompter readers. They're charismatic people that have a nice smile and get you to trust them because they're able to read effortlessly, right? But the problem is that, and I think the deeper question that needs to be asked is that when you understand this fact, who and what is responsible for creating the script or the narrative, and to what ends, right? So that's something that needs to be addressed and pondered. And so I would say, if you get all of your sources of information from these teleprompting reading robots, you yourself are a robot. And so that brings us to number 2. You identify as a Republican or a Democrat. The media is the tool used to implement the age-old tactic of divide and conquer. And what better way to do that than to make the people choose between team red and blue? So these two parties, they seem different in principle and in ideology, but it is a cleverly devised scheme. It's an illusion of choice to keep those in service to their respective parties' tenets, fighting amongst each other all the while the parasitical multinational corporations and banking elite siphon off the life energy of the nation. It's almost akin to belonging to a cult and to say that one party and its platform encompass the entire belief system of an individual. I myself am conservative on some issues, and while liberal on, regarding other issues. So, with the advent of technology, I would say that, people should espouse their own ideas and not attach them to a party. It's like, come on, dude. Like, you mean to tell me that team red or team blue fully encompasses who you are and makes up the complexity of what you are as a human being? I mean, think about it like this, like, the YouTube channel. If a underground independent rapper wants to get big on the scene and wants to make some noise, what do? They create a SoundCloud, they create a YouTube channel, right? And so I think our politicians should do the same thing. It's like, hey, if you want to know who I am and what I stand for and what I'm about, here's a whole plethora of what I believe. And it's not attached to a party, because obviously we also know the two-party system, which is the most polarizing force in the universe, is that there's too much big corporate money attached to it, which goes back to the last point. When there's big money and a consolidation of narrative, it's a recipe for disaster. So that's going to bring us on to sign number 3, and that is, you're triggered by people who don't view the world the way you do. Imagine a world where everyone thought exactly the same way. That truly is a world inhabited by robots. True diversity, it stems from the idea that each individual is unique and carries with them a view of the world predicated on personal experience, and more importantly, that view is subject to change as new and different information is encountered. And so, part of the human experience is encountering different viewpoints, and that it's a necessity. It's part and parcel with being alive in this world. It's like everybody brings to the table with them their own unique perspective. And so, rather than being triggered right out the gate, I think a better way to engage in dialogue, especially with some of the complex issues we're facing as a society, is to first and foremost set the guidelines and the groundwork for a productive conversation. If you come out the gate and someone says something you don't agree with, and the first thing you do is shut them down because you've been programmed to believe that they're the enemy, that's it's a recipe for disaster, right? So with that in mind, let's move on to the next sign that you may be a robot. Number 4, you argue online with people you don't know. Now, this might be a case of robots arguing with robots, because as many of us have come to understand that there's a lot of what you would deem appropriately, they're called bots, especially on social media platforms. It's like, how many times have you gone to an Instagram post and scrolled through the comments and just saw what you knew were just bots, right? And then you happen to go to another page and another post, and then you see somebody with another account named something else, but then basically providing the same comments. So we're in a weird situation where bots we're arguing with bots. We're not even arguing with real people anymore. And so here's an article I wanted to show you real quick. This is why the rise of bots is a concern for social networks. And I'm going to read this here real quick. Unlike a regular bot, a social bot convinces the other user that it is a real person. Researchers from the University of Southern California and Indiana University found that between 9 and 15% of active Twitter accounts are bots. Social bots are accounts controlled by software, algorithmically generating content and establishing interactions. So again, my main question is it just like and we talked about the newscasters reading from a teleprompter, and it begs the question, who's responsible for writing the script? If we know bots exist on social media platforms, who's programming the bots and to what ends, right? Because a lot of these bots now, like some bots are just like, so-and-so got me out of debt, like click here and get financial help. But then some bots are like, they really engage in political dialogue. And so it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. So you can find a bot that's, promoting these ideas, and then you go and click and look at the person's account, and it's like they got, 3 posts and no followers. That's a telltale sign that you're dealing with a bot. So I think that, if you spend a lot of time arguing with people online that you don't know, you may be a robot, especially if you're talking to another robot. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't engage in dialogue regarding these complicated issues that we face as a civilization. But I think that a better approach would be to do it face to face, at the very least voice to voice, right? Because that lends the ability for the nuance and communication required. It doesn't, you're not some dude that's editing and typing your response behind the screen. It's like we got to get back to face-to-face human contact to work these things out, not be triggered and not read from the script, not read from the narrative. On to the next point. Number 5, you double down on your position even when presented with viable counter information. I recognize that some of these titles are a little bit long-winded, but that's how I roll. So that's what it is. So you double down on information. So what does that mean? I mean, there's a term for it. It's called cognitive dissonance, right? And so let's take a look at the screen here. Let's define what cognitive dissonance is. Cognitive dissonance is a term for the state of discomfort felt when 2 or more modes of thought contradict each other. The clashing cognitions may include ideas, beliefs, or the knowledge that one has behaved in a certain way. And so, what drives the inability, or what I shouldn't say inability, but what drives people to double down on nonsense, even when they know in their heart of hearts it's nonsense? Like everything inside their being screams to them that, what they believe is probably wrong in some way, right? And unwilling to do the unpacking necessary to come to that conclusion. But everything that we've talked about up to this point are mechanisms of control that get a person to that place. It's like, if you engage in a narrative that is provided by mainstream sources, those sources are designed and weaponized psychologically to get you to be the avatar for these ideas. It's like it's almost like a form of possession, like you're possessed by these ideas that aren't even your own. And so, that is inherently a problem. So, if you're engaged in a conversation with somebody and somebody says something to you that challenges your ideas, you have to be willing to go, I've never considered that. There might be something to that. On to number 6. Number 6, You self-censor yourself in what you assume to be true to avoid ridicule or being viewed as objectionable or out of sync with the popular narrative of the day. So self-censorship is a hell of a thing, right? And if we go back to the very beginning of our list here, even before the list, when we defined what a robot was, there was this part here that stands out where it talks about or the control may be embedded within, right? And that's a hell of a thing. So when we talk about self-censorship, let's define what self-censorship is according to the good old Merriam-Webster dictionary. It is the act or action of refraining from expressing something, such as thought, a point of view or belief that others could deem objectionable. Now, this ultimately seems to be the end game of the centralized control mechanism over our sources of information to create an environment where people, they're going to willingly fall prey to cognitive dissonance, and they'll toe the line and double down on things that they know not to be true. Now, the ultimate form of Big Brother, it isn't the one that watches you from your TV screen, but it's the one that resides within you. And I would say that a growing cancel culture seems to be acting as the unseen referee that enforces this self-censorship. Now, in light of that, I would say, it takes an extreme act of courage to withstand this psychological inclination to self-censor, because you risk at the very least reputation, and at the extreme, possibly your job and livelihood. Wait until they implement a social credit score. Now, that's going to be a whole nother video. But I have up on the screen here, this is Bari Weiss. She's a former New York Times opinion editor and writer. And she basically exemplifies that courage. She resigned in 2020, and she cited that she could no longer withstand the constant harassment and cruelty she faced for daring to think for herself. Here's an excerpt from her resignation letter, which sounds more like it came out of George Orwell's Animal Farm, right? And right here it says, Rule 1, speak your mind at your own peril. Rule 2, never risk commissioning a story that goes against the narrative. Rule 3, never believe an editor or publisher who urges you to go against the grain. Eventually, the publisher will cave to the mob. The editor will get fired or reassigned, and you will be hung out to dry. So the moral of the story is that, and it was also George Orwell that stated, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And so the stakes are high in this modern day, especially, again, in light of things like cancel culture, right? We're expected to toe the line in the narrative to the letter, and if we don't, we risk being out of sync with the collective ideas of the mob. And so, telling the truth is a good way to indicate to yourself and to those around you that you are not a robot. On to the next sign. Number 7, you repost the latest trending topic or profile pic, border, or hashtag to show solidarity, knowing you either don't really care or don't know anything about the topic. Hence, virtue signaling. Now listen, I don't mean to sound like an insensitive jerk when it comes to this, but come on, man. I'm talking about those robots who literally, anything that pops off, they're the first one. They got to repost it, right? I'm talking like, it's like, we stand with this. Like, yes, I got my vaccine, and I stand with the Ukraine. And during, gay pride, it's like, yes, or Black Lives Matter. Like, I'm down. And it's like, look at me. I'm the poster child for moral virtue. And it's like, you got to stop and ask yourself, are you a robot, and are you doing this out of sincere concern for the cause at hand? And who knows? Maybe you are. Only you know that. But the truth of the matter is a lot of people, because of a narrative and because of the pressure to fall in line with what's going on in the world, people fall victim to what's called virtue signaling, right? And virtue signaling is basically the act or practice of conspicuously displaying one's awareness of and attentiveness to political issues, matters of social and racial justice, especially instead of taking effective action. And so there lies the crux of the issue. Like, are you taking action, or are you just posting a banner? Because there's a complete different thing. And again, I don't want to sound insensitive, because all of these issues at hand do require a great deal of rigorous debate. And you shouldn't be triggered, and you shouldn't shut down, and you shouldn't be afraid to speak the truth, at least how you see it, right? And allow your views about these complex issues to be possibly changed when encountered with new information. Are you a robot, or are you virtual signaling? I don't know. Only you know the answer to that question. On to the next sign. All right, number 8. You believe every conspiracy theory and espouse them. All right, you guys know me. If you get a couple of drinks in me, I will break down the Illuminati and explain every single Masonic handshake with the confidence and fervor of a used car salesman. I'm going to tell you a story. I remember being maybe about 10, 12 years ago, I was at a party in the backyard of my homie's house. And, you know, everybody's standing around drinking, doing their thing. And I happened to be within earshot of a conversation. There was a couple of young dudes in the circle. And one guy says, "Hey, you know Kobe Bryant's in the Illuminati?" And so I heard Illuminati and my interest was automatically piqued. So I kind of leaned in and he said, "Yeah, man, you ever see him when he shoots a free throw? He lets go of the ball like this. And that's the 666. And so I felt compelled to grab this young man and pull him to the side and say, "Look, bro, I get what you're doing. I understand. I was there once. But when you talk like that, you tend to sound a little bit fanatical and you do a disservice to the cause that you actually think that you're standing for," right? So what I mean by you believe every conspiracy theory is, you think of it like this. Here's a conspiracy theory for you. The machine, the propagandists know that real conspiracies exist. The tendency for people in positions of power to conspire to keep that power is a real thing. And so I believe that the machine, for lack of a better term, creates false conspiracy theories with the purpose of leading people astray. And then when that conspiracy theory is proven untrue, then you can now conveniently label and lump all conspiracy theorists into this one particular group, right? And so let me show you a little picture here. Let me, you all know this guy, right? So this guy definitely exemplifies me at one point in my life. But yeah, so you don't want to sound fanatical. You don't want to come off as someone who is doing, you know, just too much. And so I'm going to give you a recent example of what I believe is one of those psyops. Let's start with the definition. A psyop is a military operation usually aimed at influencing the enemy's state of mind through non-combative means, right? I like how it says in parentheses there, such as distributing leaflets. It's like, no, dude, we're not dropping leaflets out of planes. This isn't World War II. Anyway, I believe that the machine is engaging in psychological operations, creating fake conspiracy theories to lead people off the trail. One that comes to mind in recent times was the QAnon phenomenon, right? And so this was promoted through like underground chat forums like 4chan. And basically what it did was it described a scenario where Donald Trump was behind the scenes working with John F. Kennedy Jr., who was still alive, and they were looking to expose the elite satanic pedophile ring that was happening in Washington, D.C. Now, mind you, I have my own opinions about some elements of that conspiracy theory, minus the Donald Trump and the JFK part. The point I'm trying to make is that, again, you've got to be careful when you engage in conversations regarding these complicated subjects, because you don't want to sound like a raving lunatic, all right? So with that in mind, let's get to the last two signs that you may be a robot, and these are going to sting a little bit. Number 9, you spend entirely too much time scrolling on your phone. Guilty as charged. Yes, I definitely am someone who is guilty of this. So that means to a varying degree, I have been assimilated by the machine and am a robot. But, you know, we've got to really understand, you know, what, listen, we've got generations of people who will never know life without the screen, right? You see babies in strollers, they're glued to their tablets, and parents, they push their kids while they're face down on their iPhone. We're just beginning to see the long-term effect of these practices. The way we communicate with each other, the way we view and interact with the world are all being changed, and then I'd argue probably not for the best. And then you got things like augmented reality and the metaverse. They're all on the way. And so they're truly changing the world we live in, and we're entering into uncharted robot-like territory. In fact, here's a few interesting statistics you might want to take a look at. So let's first look at, this is, what was this dated? January 12th, recently, 2023. How much time does the average American spend on their phone in 2023? Most mobile phone users check their phone up to 63 times daily. Americans spend an average screen time of 5.4 hours on their mobile phones daily. There will be over 311.53 million smartphone users in America by 2025. The list goes on. So, I mean, what's the moral of the story is that we're so integrated with technology that it's literally become an extension of who we are and what it is to be a human being. And so we got to be mindful of that. We got to be careful of how much time we spend with these technologies because we become more and more like them, right? So with all of those previous 9 signs in mind, they cumulatively lead to the 10th, which is you are caught in a perpetual loop with little deviation. All right, so listen, NPCs are non-player characters. It's a term that's gained traction in the cultural zeitgeist in recent years. And so the term, it was born out of tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, something that I used to love as a youth, and in fact, I still play today. They describe the periphery of people that you dealt with as the main player and that you had no control over. Typically, the game or dungeon master was in control of the NPCs. So recent shows and movies such as Westworld and Free Guy, they really illustrated that these NPCs that were programmed to run loops, meaning that they basically engage in the same activities over and over again. So they really just played the role of background noise. So the question is, like, when you analyze yourself, do you find yourself going through the same basic patterns day after day, month after month, year after year with very little variance? I mean, you go to work, you sleep, you scroll, you eat, TV, maybe an annual vacation. Wash, rinse, repeat. If you answered yes to any of these on our list, then chances are you've been programmed to varying degrees by outside forces and are running somebody else's program, and hence are a robot. So what to do? Human beings we're complicated creatures. Our level of consciousness allows us to contemplate things very deeply. The brain is an organic computer, and if you aren't programming it, then what is? Right? I mean, listen. Again, your brain, the computer is modeled off of the human brain. And so it is subject to programming by outside forces. And so you have to ask yourself, who's in control of that programming? Is it me or is it something else? And if the answer is something else, well, then you may be something more akin to a robot than a human being. So what to do in light of that? I guess the answer is to try to reconnect with your humanity. We've illustrated a lot of things within this list that I think that you can counteract just by engaging in simple human activities. Go outside, spend time in nature, talk to people, like have real discussions, and don't be afraid to have your ideas challenged. Don't be afraid to go out and talk about complicated issues. We live in a society where there's certain taboo things that you're not supposed to talk about. I completely disagree. I think that those things need to be discussed. And in order for us to have a robust society that really truly celebrates diversity, we need to all have our own opinions, and those opinions need to be formed by our willingness to engage the world around us. Go outside, revel in the mystery of life, like stare at the stars, like be, once upon a time, before all this wonderful technology, we would be enamored by nature and the stars and reality and what's our purpose and what are we doing here. And now, because we all are just immersed in the screen, it's like all of the answers, all of the mysteries have been solved. And so there's nothing more for you to do than just be entertained and scroll and do all this crazy stuff. So listen, man, this has been a retrospective look into the future for who amongst us really can withstand the machine. Listen, I'm your humble host, the mad prophet of the airwaves, Adam Dutch Cole, and I hope you join me next time. This is part 1 in the 3-part series, part 2 dropping soon. And to you and yours, I wish you good night and good luck.
Robots. Yes. All I see are robots. Yes.